it. So welcome all. Once again, it is my privilege and pleasure to come and spend these few moments of your time. There is only one. The very essence of all is all that is, a unity, a singularity. And then there were two. So the law of paradox immediately emerges. There is self, there is the other. And so begins, shall we say, the first separation, and all of humanity's difficulties and all of humanity's benefits arise from duality, from the polarization that allows perspective. So, shall we say, then begins the law of polarity. Everything that is created is in balance with its opposite. So, shall we say, it is a dynamic balance, it is not a static one. So if one, shall we say, loads up one side of the balance, naturally the other begins to take effect. If one wants one thing, then it automatically produces its opposite, as we have spoken about. So shall we begin by recognizing that often it is a balance between what is called the head, the rational, and the so-called irrational, the heart. The head, the mind, wants to differentiate and begins the analysis and the ability to understand, and the heart wants to integrate. The heart wants to bring everything back together into its unified form. So, shall we say, the mind then begins to create alternatives, and the heart wants to understand them, bring them back together. So, the two are, of course, in equal and opposite. And so often then the head, shall we say, the mind is given a bad rap. The mind is the problem, without understanding that the heart too is the problem. Because the heart is where attachment comes in, where addictions come in. So shall we say then, the mind presents itself in science and in the facts and in the experimentation and so forth. And the heart presents itself in religion, in wanting to be, shall we say, spiritual and connected with all things. And so whenever there is more science, there will automatically become more religion. They are balanced and so forth. And looking to find the balance in the opposites is fraught, because the balance arises only at the fulcrum, that is, in the balance point between the two. Enough for us to begin a conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mercredan. So I know you've already started talking to us about this, but can you please explain what the law of polarity is and why is it so important for us to understand this?
One always wants to have one's cake and eat it. You understand? One wants to have one side that one can have and yet not recognize that the other must also be present. So those that have automatically create all those that do not have, in order to keep the balance in place. And yet, shall we say, each imbalance produces its own effects. So shall we say, if one has too much, has more than one's share as it is, one automatically gets less than one's share of something else. So often it is said, money does not buy you happiness. Of course not, because the very balancing act requires something in return. If one gives, then one must return. Whatever one takes, one must also give. So you understand, if one wants to create the ideal experience for self, one has first of all to keep and understand the nature of balance. That one always realizes that every action has its competing reaction, an equal and opposite reaction, of course. And so it is that, shall we say, science and the principles that it demonstrates exist, of course, in all dimensions and all aspects, as does the nature of its religious counterpart. Do you follow what I mean? So the law of polarity is the law of balancing one's nature. So one realizes that actions come with the commensurate reaction. One gets what one puts into the world. And so it is always, shall we say, purposeful, if one wants to create one's personal reality, to do it knowing what the consequences of one's actions will produce. Do you follow what I mean? So whatever it is, if you think that you can just manufacture what you want by repeating or visualizing or so forth, the consequence will still come into being. So often people want to experience something. Shall we say, as an example, I want lots of money. And then something of consequence comes about. Shall we say, an example is the parent dies and one gets a legacy of life insurance. So it was fulfilled, of course, but the balance was also fulfilled. Does this explain anything at all?
Yes. Sorry. Yes, it does. Thank you. So one example we've been given to think about the law of polarity is to think about it as two sides of the same coin. Can you give us examples of using this perspective in our own lives?
Shall we say this? The common error, shall we say, of humanity is to see something in another, rather than seeing whatever you can perceive in another is active in self. So in order, shall we say, not to attract into your life that which one holds judgment for, one first of all eliminates it from self. When one eliminates, shall we say, and replaces something in self, some disharmony, then it automatically turns up in the world around you. Do you follow what I mean? So then we arrive at what we have already spoken about. The world and oneself are not a separate thing. You are the artist. You are the author and authority writing your script and drawing in the actors and being the star. And the resolution, shall we say, for stardom is one refines oneself until one has arrived at a point that is as close to perfection as is attainable within the physical realm. So many people want to leave the physical and immediately ascend to the spiritual realm, but without having completed the tasks. One can only descend once more into the fray, as it were, into the physical world of time, space, and experience. So you understand, everything we're talking about is the results of a balance between the creative force and the environment. One is attracting that which one is. Do you understand what I mean? So then if there is some difficulty, then you are the difficulty yourself. You are not the victim of any challenge at all. And even what appears on the surface to be the greatest challenges that humankind can experience, they also come with the greatest gifts in terms of balance. That is, sometimes one incarnates to, shall we say, gain total and high levels of spiritual awareness. And it comes because you become the focus for other people's judgments. You understand? And what you see in them is how you can provide, shall we say, love and acceptance, and often allowing them their total freedom.
Thank you. Can you just go ahead and explain what the tasks you're attaining the perfection that you speak of? Is that forgiveness?
That is forgiveness, of course. To forgive oneself is to find, shall we say, forgiveness for others. If you realize they are simply actors in the script that you wrote yourself. You are the authority, and it is in the awakening that one sees what is truly happening and adjusts your script to fulfill the new perceptions. Do you understand? Before that, you cannot change the script because you have no insight into it. And so often, shall we say, people have great shifts in how they have been operating. They, shall we say, find a new stability because suddenly perception opens the eyes.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you?
I want to add to this
Sure.
how important the nature of this discussion is in terms of the law of magnetism. What one draws to one is that which fulfills what one has ascertained. When one has found forgiveness for self, then all of the holes, all of that which took up so much attention is empty. And the law of attraction says that every vacuum will be filled with that which fits it.
Thank you. We're going to get into that in a lot of detail next time. It's very exciting. So can you give us some examples or an example about how the law of polarity might play out in relationships, please?
The law of polarity is a law of balance. The masculine is balanced by the feminine. They are opposites. They are equal, but very different. In other words, shall we say, if one has, shall we say, an electrical circuit. One has the very outlet where the power lies, hidden away in the wall. But to access that, one has to connect with it. One has to plug in a fitting that is designed to fit with the particular form of outlet. You cannot simply join any plug from any different position on the planet into your specific outlet. It has to be the one that fits. So, shall we say, the law of polarity in terms of relationships is the coming together of opposites that fit together. And through that, power can be utilized. Do you understand? So it is the feminine that holds all of the power. And it is the masculine that must tap into that in order to utilize it for the benefit of the whole. Because if the masculine is going to draw from the power of the feminine without giving something in return, then the feminine will turn off. And the power will cease to flow. And the result of that, shall we say, is the consequences of greed and avarice. Do you follow what I mean? So there is always a connection that allows energy to flow. And together, it is better to utilize the mechanisms, shall we say, that have been presented. A human then chooses which polarity best suits their conditions in their moment of incarnation. First of all, an I arises, the personality comes into being, and the body is neither one nor the other. And then a choice has to be made. From then on, many decisions might be changed and altered, but the fundamental will remain as it was set. Does this answer some part of the question?
It does. It does. Thank you. Can you now give us an example of how the law of polarity might play out when it comes to money, finances, or even our career?
There is a notion that the law of attraction, the law of magnetism, one can have anything at all because it is unlimited. And from the higher perspective, that is true. But in the incarnated framework of space and time, there is a limited structure. And there is, shall we say, a limited gameplay, if you like. If one is, shall we say, playing a game, there are so many items one can accumulate, but it is not unlimited. The more one accumulates, the less there is left in the pot, as it were, for others. When that occurs, shall we say, those others want to get access more to the pot. So you then generate competition and you generate corruption because there is only a little left. And so it goes on. Those with more have more ability to take more, and so the imbalance, of course, the result of the imbalance has to find its consequence. The consequences are that there is less of everything else. So at the present time, you are gaining less and less of certain qualities and more of others, shall we say this. The nature of the planetary system, that is the weather system as such, is a reflection of humanity. The emotional bonds, shall we say, are represented by the seas and the waters of the planet. So as, shall we say, the energy of gain and loss, the energy of what is termed stress builds, so then the planet responds with its experiences regarding the weather and the waters and so forth. So more and more of this is coming into play. The seas are no longer safe. The seas are gaining and growing, as it were. The storms are rampant, and in other places, shall we say, there is less and less. So all of it is a reflection of the balance between finances, that is the money, and its response, that is how that plays out.
So what happens if the what you're explaining sounds like what we call climate change? How does
Of course,
that reflection of how we are managing finances, the financial system globally?
Shall we say this? The internal climate inside of the self is one, shall we say, mm, mm, of desert, that is, it has no feeling, and one of flood. So that internal state is projected into the environment. If it is the odd person, that will not affect anything. But when it is the mass humanity, then the planet begins to respond in like. You understand? That is, it is reflected for lessons to be learned. So, shall we say, everyone is responsible, and everyone will gain, shall we say, the experiences and the consequences of the internal actions. And so it is that some people are, shall we say, watching from the sidelines. They are not involved in either side of the drama, as it were, realizing that it is part of the unified whole, but they are not taking part. They are sideline actors, as it were. Does this make some sort of sense? And so it is, these ones often are guided to move from one place to another. It all happens in a sort of natural way, but it is guided from the whole. Does this make sense?
Yeah, thank you. So if everything exists with its reflection, how can we each as individuals have more control over being able to experience the positive reflection of the polarities?
Shall we say, where is one's inside? If one truly perceives what is happening and forgives it, because you understand the great master himself is the words put into his mouth are not necessarily words, of course, spoken by this being, but nevertheless are true in context. Forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And so that is the state that allows one to rise above it, to come to a new aspect, a new perception of how this affects one in one's own life. You understand? So look to the outside. Look to the mirror, because in the mirror, let us take this as an example. You are standing in front of your mirror. You'll notice that the you in your mirror is standing exactly the same distance from the surface as you yourself. It is perfectly a reflection. And yet, if you were to move your right hand, you will find your mirror's left hand is what responds to it. Do you understand? So it is always balancing the movement, always acting in a certain way. If one comes up to the mirror, one approaches it from both sides at the same time. One comes to the point where one can look into the eyes in the mirror and realize, I too am one. That the one on the other side is indeed self, has a life as equally as pertinent as one's own, that it is only appearances that cause this separation. So, shall we say, one needs never to take anything at face value, as if you automatically know the answers. Because putting it this way, the answers are a mystery. All answers lead to deeper questions. Do you follow what I mean? And eventually they come to ascending past the law of paradox. Two sides of the coin become a wholeness. Two sides of the balance become a wholeness. A unity. So it is science and religion are one and the same.
Thank you. What are some practices that we can integrate to expand our capacity to see and hold multiple perspectives relating to paradoxes and polarities we are faced with our interpersonal relationships?
First of all, one recognizes that two sides of a polarity are not at war. So often humanity makes the judgment of right and wrong, of better or worse, not as good as, and so forth. These are the, shall we say, the judgments of the mind. And the heart holds resentment and anger and so forth. As a result, it is the consequences. And yet when you bring your head and your heart together as a unified being, one starts to perceive how one's intuition and one's analysis are always the same. There is always a compliancy between the two opposites. So one should always use one's heart and one's mental facilities together in a unified form. To listen to the heart and ignore the mind is equally as bad as listening to the mind and ignoring the heart. And so it is that the two forms, generally, shall we say, science and religion, masculine and feminine, all of these polarities come to that point of the separation that occurred at the fulcrum point, that is at the balance point, which holds up the balance. Without the fulcrum, there is no balance at all. They are simply flat and of no measurable use at all. Does this make sense? And is it possible to come to terms with it in one's own life? First of all, one has to value the heart. And then one has also to value the mind. They are valuable instruments for perceiving the world that you are creating for yourself. These are the instruments of abundance. One needs to find one's path, to make sure that it is in alignment with one's values, but one also has to put your heart into it. Do what makes your heart sing, but not at the expense of your values. Do you understand what I mean? So many people put their heart and soul into making money, of competing, of achieving, of gaining momentum over something else, to win a war, a competition, but at the expense of what truly they hold valuable.
Thank you. How are opposites linked? Are they forever intrinsically linked?
All things are linked from the initial separation. In order for you to have a self, one must automatically be able to perceive something else, something other than oneself. So it is not possible without the reintegration into unity. And in unity, of course, all distinctions disappear. There is, shall we say, no evidence for anything at all. There is nothing to apply a name to, because applying a name means that something other must be applying that name. So often the idea is there is a God separate from self. Now one is, shall we say, in fear or in awe or in service of the God one perceives. But it is not unity. It is not the love of a God, should it exist. The love of a God would never presents such a challenge. It is the human that presents the challenge for the purpose of its own evolution. So every experience is of benefit. And in so creating the benefit, the lack of benefit also appears. One has to overcome some opposite to gain benefit. Does this make sense? So each side of the coin is intrinsically part of the whole coin.
Thank you. Duality exists in everything. Can you explain further what duality means and how that can play out in reality?
One arrives in an incarnated body in order to present oneself with challenges over time and space. The most important aspect is that one's creations do not occur without time. Time to reflect. You understand, the time to see what one has created. That is the, shall we say, the imaginary versus what one also imagines. That is, one is presenting what one wants in relationship to what one does not want. The two are always present. And so it is that one is applying this. One's state of being is always considering what action must the I take in order to bring this into the framework rather than that into the framework. So there is a constant evolution of self. Do you follow what I mean? So it is always operating on what is to what one is moving towards, as opposed to what one is moving away from. What one fears most will give you the greatest motivation. So often you are saying that fear is of no value at all, and I am saying fear, like all things, is highly valuable. If you want somebody to change, fear is the greatest thing one can bring to bear. Does this follow, and is this truly part of the answer to this question?
Yeah. Yes, thank you. I have a question about manifestation or creation. So we have the intention, we ask the question for whatever we want to create, then we let it go with faith. But how do we reinforce this? Do we need to keep asking the same thing, as some people suggest? How can we make it stronger and make the bands of creation stronger?
First of all, the mind and the heart in balance. One rises to the fulcrum point. One has put in, shall we say, the imaginary terms. And now one has to activate it. The heart then is the activating mechanism. Do you trust yourself? Do you honor yourself? Are you master of your universe? Are you truly responsible for the creation? Whatever it is. Are you the author of your script? Have you written it into the script? Do you understand the consequences that will come with this? Do you understand when you, shall we say, are writing the script for the movie, one writes the whole script before one begins to take, to bring the actors in. You are not writing it on the spot. What will this person say next? And so on. You have already produced the script and the consequences that every action plays out in terms of self and others and the environment one finds oneself in. Do you understand? So it is not just how will this affect myself? It is how will this affect myself, my family around me? How will this affect the environment? And so on it goes. Shall we say the frequency is radiating out in all directions and producing results in all areas of life. Do you follow what I mean? Shall we say, for example, you want to become very successful in business. So you create the success in business, and before you know it, you have ascended the ladder of success. Now you are required to travel the world. So now you are hardly ever at home. You are not seeing your wife and your children, and so on. And then this affects how they are. And one of the children starts to get into trouble with others, and the wife is finding, shall we say, friendships with others, and your life is completely turned upside down. Is that the consequence that you took on? Did you discuss how this might affect others? Do you follow what I mean? So it has consequences, and they have to be perceived. Otherwise, you may have, I want to be successful in business, but I want a successful marriage, and I want to have children who are successful as well, and so on. That limits one's own response. Do you follow what I mean? One has to take less for self in order to complete and fulfill for the whole. Do you follow how this has such an impact on how one applies the law of magnetism?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. So, with all of these laws, do they become stronger in our lives when we bring them into our own consciousness?
When you start operating from and taking into account the three basic universal laws, you start to realize how your life is structured. You start to be able to manage the interactions, and more that you manage it, the more comfortable you become with them, and the more comfortable you become in your storyline. Now you are writing your script with certain knowledge that affects how you have produced the storyline, where it has its points of interest, so that it holds your own attention and gives you an ongoing sense of fulfillment. Now you are becoming, shall we say, a notable script writer. Notice that if you are a good script writer, then others will want to be apprentice to that. They will want to find out, how did you decide on this aspect of it? How did you decide to not take that apparent track through the forest that looked as if it was going to give you everything you wanted? How did you decide against that? Do you follow what I mean? Because there is a skill of using one's heart and mind. So, shall we say, the spiritual upliftment, the point of the fulcrum is when heart and mind are unified. There is no separation at all.
So we don't necessarily experience the laws stronger, we just become better script writers.
The laws apply. There is no strength in the laws. They simply apply. It doesn't matter how much you know about gravity. It is still going to bring you to ground. However, you might design yourself a flying suit and be able to enjoy the descent and to cover vast areas and to see things from very different perspectives, always relying on gravity to keep you on track. Do you follow what I mean? The law of gravity applies. That is part of the physical world. The laws of paradox and polarity and magnetism or attractivity apply no matter what.
Thank you. Last question. You have said before about rising above the emotional hooks. What is the easiest way to do this, as it seems the emotional hooks are deep in some circumstances?
Shall we come back to the point at the fulcrum? Once one carries one's emotional hooks to the mind will immediately point out the separation. It will point out you are not your hooks. You are not attached to your hooks. They are choices you are making. And so on, the mind will help to identify what is it that you are addicted to. And the mind will also ask, how can you get what you need fulfilled without the addiction?
Thank you.
Do you follow what I mean? So when the two come together, and it is not always the mind releasing the heart, because the heart can often stand and show that the mind has got itself into a terminal loop. The repetitive arguments on top of its own arguments, and that is repetitive, and it requires the heart to ask it, what is it you are looking for? What is it that will give you respite? And most often, the mind will stop even in its tracks. Together, these are formidable gifts from the divine.
Thank you. So is the heart and mind balance the two polarities? Is that the key for us today?
Can you repeat the question? It is distorting.
Sorry. I was saying what the key message was for today. Would it be when you mentioned how our heart and mind, we talked about that a lot today, the heart and mind being
distorting beyond that is impossible to interpret what the question is.
I think it's time to wrap up for today.
Then thank you once again. Life is both a journey and a gift from the divine. If one is truly thankful, grateful for the gift, then the divine will deliver more depth to the gift itself, to the point where you are so grateful that you have been given life to experience. And so it is that the self and the divine are two sides of the polar coin. Whatever you fulfill in your role, shall we say, gets the consequences within divinity. Thank you for your time and your attention. Thank you. And wherever you are. Enjoy your days.